Yo, 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 welcome back to yet another and the final, well, I shouldn't say the final video of this college football series. Not the final college football video, but after this, we are going on a trend of NFL related videos. So, oh man, who would have thought the final six teams we're going to talk about would take more time than the entire fucking 24 teams before that? But that just goes to show how much work I put in. I don't have the notes with me today because the last time I did it was 15 fucking pages. So I got it all on my phone. I'm just going to be reading the shit out. All right, all right, all right. Before we get to it, first of all, thank you for watching the video. And we ready? Yeah, we ready, man. All right, let's get into it. My number 3 team in the country, Oregon. Obviously, moving from the Pac-12 to the Big Ten, went 11-2 last season, was ranked as highly as number 5. But let's get right into it, man. So, first thing I want to say is that the job that Dan Lanning has done at Oregon has been one of the biggest stories in college football. That's not to say Oregon was like a dead program or anything when he got there, but they have certainly changed everybody's outlook on them in just 2 years, right? They've won 22 games over the last 2 seasons. They've been amazing in terms of playing, and winning against teams that they should beat. They've only lost 5 games in the last 2 seasons. In the last 2 or 3 years, uh, sorry, in the last 2 years, 3 of those 5 losses came against Michael Penix in Washington. Okay, so when you take that into consideration, they've only lost to 2 teams outside of Washington over the last 2 seasons. Okay, um, and the other one, another one of those losses came against Georgia in Dan Lanning's very first game at Oregon. The other one came against a very good Oregon State team 2 seasons ago. So, obviously the level of competition they've played has been very high these last 2 seasons. They lost a lot of good players to the NFL. Okay. They lost Bo Nix, who was arguably the best quarterback in the country over the last 2 seasons. We're going to talk about the guy that they brought in order to replace him. And honestly, I think this is the year where Oregon takes that next step and they could potentially go all the way and end up winning a national championship. Let's get into what they were last season, statistically speaking. So, as an offense, arguably the best in the country. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and say it. Oregon was the best offense in the country last season. In terms of balance between pass and run game, points per game, their offensive line was flat out incredible. They hardly ever turned it over, even though they led the country in passing yards per game. It was the best offense in the country. You can probably find teams. Well, you can only find teams really that ran it better than them, but it was the best offense in the country last season. Like I said, Bo Nix, a big part of that. They were just loaded with talent, running back, wide receiver, offensive line, at all position groups. They were astonishing, and they all played up to the top of their potential. Defensively as well, though, this is a story to talk about as well. Defensively, they were very good, top 10 in multiple categories, notably rushing yards allowed and points per game. Um, they also did not give up many total yards per game. They weren't bottom of the barrel anywhere. At worst, they were, middle of the pack in passing yards allowed. Takeaways, they didn't get too many takeaways, but overall, a very good defense. I'd argue probably a top 20 defense in the country to go along with the best offense. I think Oregon has a good case to be the most statistically impressive team in the country last season. And I don't make that, I don't crown that position lightly. Let's get into the roster though. We know what they were last season. They were great. Only 2 losses came to the team who was the runner up in the national championship game. Okay. They dominated everybody else. Let's look at the roster now that they're going into next season with. Okay. Let's start off with the quarterback here. Dylan Gabriel will probably be, I'm not going to say for sure yet, but he will most likely be my pick for the Heisman. When I eventually end up making that video, maybe a month from now, who knows? The man was absolutely fabulous last season at Oklahoma. And I actually think he could one up himself next season. Over 4,000 yards and 42 touchdowns last year, and he only threw 6 interceptions. Those are damn near Bo Nix numbers. All of that also, he only played 12 games last season at Oklahoma. So take into account that the fact that he could potentially be playing 13, 14, maybe even 15 games next season at Oregon, we could easily be seeing a season where he puts up over 5,000 yards and 50 touchdowns, which would be well in the realm of, Heisman level. Um, the run game, I do expect it to be phenomenal yet again in Eugene. Jordan James was the backup to Bucky Irving last season, but that did not stop him from getting nearly 900 yards and 12 touchdowns. He was extremely explosive every time he touched the ball. He's poised for a breakout season. And all respect to Bucky Irving, but I actually think that Jordan James has the potential to be even better than Bucky Irving when it's all said and done, because he's a very young player as well. He could play for multiple seasons. Noah Winnington still being on the roster is actually a shock to me. I know he had a really good season in 2022. He had almost 950 total yards and 6 touchdowns. I didn't know where he was last season. I had just assumed that he graduated and went on to the next level. But I came to find out while I was doing research for this video that he is still on the roster. And he was just RB3 last year because Jordan James and Bucky Irving were so amazing. So the fact that he's still here to complement Jordan James in the run game is massive. And the fact that this makes it a three-headed attack here in the run game between Noah Winnington, Jordan James, and Dylan Gabriel now, I actually expect them to run for more yards per game than they did last season. So let's talk about the tight end first here, Terrence Ferguson out of the receiving core. Over the last 2 seasons now, he's had over 800 combined yards and 11 touchdowns. Very few tight ends in college football are like flat out, blow your socks off statistically. But Terrence Ferguson, I do think, is one of the better pass catching tight ends in the country. And I think he's going to be an absolutely massive weapon for Dylan Gabriel. Now let's talk about the actual wide receivers here. And I don't even know where to start, man. Let's go with Gary Bryant first. He's their wide receiver 4. Used to play at USC, transferred to Oregon last season. He's entering his 5th year of college football now. He's had multiple years where he's had at least 440 receiving yards. He was a solid role player last season, and obviously in case of injury, I'm sure the Ducks would have no trouble, moving Gary Bryant up a spot for a couple games. And it's always valuable to have guys like that where, in case of injury, they can step up and still produce at a very high level. Next up, we got Trayshawn Holden here. He is the big body, former Alabama wideout. He spent 3 seasons at Alabama before transferring to Oregon last season. He's gotten better every year of his career statistically. And last year was his breakout year, if you want to call it that. He had over 450 yards, and he did have 7 total touchdowns. So I love his upside. I think he's very valuable as a deep threat with his size and speed. It's very easy to get him the ball in one-on-one matchups. So I think he's going to be a very explosive and a standout weapon for them going into next season. We also have Evan Stewart here. He's the star transfer player they got this offseason, coming from Texas A&M. He was a true freshman in 2022, and I believe he was either first or second in the country in terms of yards as a true freshman. He had 650. He dealt with injuries last season, which limited his production. But with that being said, he still had over 500 yards and 4 touchdowns. He's missed about 6 or 7 games in his first 2 years at Texas A&M. But, their offense was nothing to brag about these last 2 years. So I think it's understandable why guys like him, didn't have monster seasons statistically. But obviously, we're talking about the upside here and what he could be at Oregon. I can't give you a prediction in terms of numbers, but if we're talking about a list of breakout receivers next season, Evan Stewart needs to be near the top of that list because I think everybody knows the talent that's there, and he could be an absolute monster for them. But now let's move on to their number 1 receiver, their biggest returning talent on offense, you could make the argument, and that's Tez Johnson. I think he's going to be Dylan Gabriel's favorite target. Last year, Johnson transferred from Troy after spending 3 years there. And in his first season at Oregon, he racked in over 85 catches, almost 1,200 yards, and 10 touchdowns. His connection with Bo Nix was obvious from the get-go, and he and Troy Franklin proved to be one of the best wide receiver duos in the country. Now, as the new number 1, I expect him to take that role early and put together several monster performances early in the season. He should not be overlooked as one of the best wide receivers in the country, and he is a dark horse as well for the Biletnikoff Award. Now let's talk about the unsung hero of this offense the last 2 years, and that's been the offensive line. For 2 years in a row, this line has allowed the least amount of sacks in the country, which is incredibly impressive. Obviously, a part of that has to be credited to Bo Nix for his veteran leadership and experience. But, they've also been able to open up a lot of holes in the run game for guys like Bucky Irving and Jordan James. And even before that, who was it? It was like Troy Dye or Travis Dye, I think was his name. So they did lose Jackson Powers Johnson to the NFL, but they only bring in one new starter via the transfer portal, which I actually like. I think they still have the majority of this offensive line intact and together from last season. So, yeah, man, I think people fail to realize that if Dylan Gabriel stays healthy, he's going to end up breaking Bo Nix's record for total career starts. So the Ducks are actually going to go from the most experienced quarterback in college football history to the next most experienced quarterback in college football history the very next season. So when I look at this offense, man, I don't see any flaws. I think we could be talking about the most efficient, the most experienced, maybe not experienced, but the most efficient, the most balanced, and possibly the best offense in the country by the end of next season. I mean, it's that good on paper, you know. And let's get to their defense now. So when I look at the defense, the first place I start is with the secondary because they bring in four new starters via the transfer portal. And normally that would be a concern for me. But in this case, every single one of these additions looks like a home run to me. All three of their corners are big name players from Division One schools who I recognized immediately. And the safety from Kansas State, Kobe Savage, is also a guy who was very sought after, and he should be a day one impact guy. Let's start off with Jabbar Muhammad. He comes over from Washington, and he was one of their heroes defensively last season. He was a big name guy there that made a lot of plays, and he was very sought after when he put his name into the transfer portal. He could have been in the NFL if he wanted to declare for the draft. Brandon Johnson, nickelback, comes from Duke, who made a lot of impact plays in his time there, plays with a lot of heart, gets after the quarterback a lot for DB, has one of the highest amount of sacks of any defensive back in the country. And then you got Cam Alexander coming over from UTSA as a freshman, true freshman, I believe. He had 15 passes defended there. So this secondary on paper might be the best I've seen in the entire country. And not to mention the starting strong safety who returns from last season for Oregon, who is one of the most experienced players on the entire team, Daishin Washington. So I love the secondary. Oregon also returns four members of its front line, and it uses the transfer portal to bring in a starting defensive tackle from Texas Tech, Jamari Caldwell, who had 6.5 sacks himself last season. I like that a lot. Jordan Birch, he returns. He led the team in sacks last season at 7.5, and I actually expect Oregon's defense to be better than it was last season, which is saying a lot. Because they were already a very reliable unit. And I do think that playing against a lower caliber of offense next season in the Big Ten is going to make a big difference. And also not to mention the massive upgrades they made in several places. But, you know, this will be the most talented team that Dan Lanning has had so far at Oregon. So the roster, it might be the second best in the country compared to only my number one team I have on here. Like man, I could make a 20-minute video just talking about Oregon's offense and another 10-minute video talking about their defense. It's that good. It's the best we've seen so far, without a doubt. Let's get to their schedule though. All right. So they won all 12 of their wins last season. Well, actually, it wasn't 12. Did I get their record wrong? It was 12-2. I got their fucking record wrong then. Yep, it was 12-2. All 12 of their wins last season came by at least 8 points. Okay. So besides the Texas Tech game, that was the only close game I could think of. Every other win was comfortable. Okay. Washington, like I said, has just had their number the last two seasons. But I did think Oregon was a top five team in the country last season. And I actually thought they should have made the playoff. They ended up also playing 8 teams last season who were ranked at one point, and they did go 6-2 against those teams. Next season, though, here's the thing. They only play 3 teams next season who are in my top 30. Okay. I expect them to mop the floor with their Big Ten regular season schedule here. And let's get into what I think their toughest games are going to be. All right. So week six versus Ohio State is going to answer a lot of questions here for both teams. Oregon gets to play them on the second game of a home stretch, and they will already have had an early bye week, so they should be extremely fresh, rested, and ready to play for this game. Ohio State will have already had their bye week as well, and their previous game against Iowa may help prepare their offense for the Oregon defense. The history here favors Oregon because their previous matchup against Ohio State went in their favor in 2022. That was in Columbus, which Oregon managed to win. Dylan Gabriel has proven that he can play and win in big games because of his performance against Texas, notably because of his performance against Texas last season. Whereas Will Howard is a massive question mark for Ohio State, especially in big games. I really do think Oregon wins a hard fought, gritty performance here. I'm not sure if either team will pull away, but a back and forth classic and a raucous crowd to crown the regular season champion of the Big 12 is what I expect here. I said Big 12, it's Big 10, sorry. The duty right here, in my opinion, is on Ohio State to prove that they can be the more physical team in a top 10 matchup. I think, the last couple years, if we think about these top games that Ohio State's played, Michigan the last three times, Oregon, Georgia, Missouri, Ohio State has kind of built that opinion, or that what's the word, that stereotype of themselves that they always lose when a more physical team plays against them. So it's up to them to snap that belief and prove that they can hang with these teams that love to, run the ball and play tough nosed defense. So I do think Oregon takes this game though. And by beating Ohio State, all eyes will be on Oregon as the favorites to win the Big Ten in their first season. They will certainly be able to take care of business in their next two games, which means an 8-0 Oregon will be heading to the Big House to kill the second powerhouse of the Big Ten. Michigan, by this point, will have already had their game against Texas, but regardless of that outcome, this game was a must win for both teams. So so not all of the marbles are placed on the result of the Ohio State game, which they have to play on the road. Talking about Michigan, that is. I'm almost positive that Michigan's offense will have formed and effectively collapsed by this point. Unless Michigan is able to pull together some type of defensive performance that, we've never seen before, there is no way that they can beat Oregon, in my opinion, at least. The Ducks can beat Michigan in whatever way they choose. I expect a blowout to secure Oregon's shot at the Big Ten championship here. This will lead to a very ceremonial 11-0 Oregon versus Washington in the final week of the regular season. The reason I call this ceremonial is because under Dan Lanning, like I said, Washington is 3-0 against Oregon. So not only does that mean Oregon will have the chance to go undefeated in this game and potentially enter the conference championship weekend as the number one team in the country, but they might be able to exercise their demons, if you will, against Washington. In terms of the game itself, I can guarantee Oregon will take this game as seriously as any of the other games on their schedule. This will be a masterful coaching job by Dan Lanning, in my opinion, in terms of motivation and preparation, in terms of getting his team ready to play this game. I think Washington just has no way to beat Oregon in this game. I expect them to get dominated on the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball. And I think Oregon will close the door on this rivalry as both teams enter the Big Ten. So overall here for Oregon, I think that Dan Lanning has built a powerhouse in Eugene. And the only thing that is keeping people from calling them a top tier program is the playoff appearance, right? That is all but guaranteed this year, in my opinion. The real question is, do they beat Ohio State twice, right? They could go 2-0, 1-1, or 0-2 against Ohio State. I'm not sure how that swings for them. I expect them to make the playoffs regardless, though, of what the answer is to that. But obviously, a win in the conference championship game would give them a home playoff game. This would really affect their chances of going all the way in the playoffs and winning their first national championship. But regardless of that, I expect them to make the playoffs, win at least one playoff game, and then from there, who knows? But I expect this to be Oregon's most successful season under Dan Lanning. Next up, I got Georgia at number 2. This was extremely difficult for me. I've gone back and forth on this so many times. I'm not really sure how confident I am in the selection here, but what I do know is that Kirby Smart is the best coach in college football, and Georgia is the best program in college football right now. Carson Beck is one of the best returning quarterbacks in the country. With all that being said, The amount of regression that has taken place, at least in the roster, is mind blowing. They haven't made as many impact moves in the portal as a team like Ohio State, for example, who was obviously my number one. And they haven't had as many NFL level players opt to return as Ohio State has. That's the real difference here. Ohio State has the better roster, undeniably, in my opinion. Georgia has a couple advantages, but I'm taking Ohio State's roster every time. And I'm trying to be as objective as possible here, even though I guess you could say I like Georgia more than Ohio State. Let's get into what Georgia did last season. Obviously, it was kind of a swing. Georgia was still a very good defense, but I think their offense really did take a big step forward. Top five in total yards and points per game. They did not give up many sacks whatsoever. A very balanced offense, top 20 in passing and rushing. And that's even though their first couple games, they were not a great running team whatsoever. So, the latter half of their season, they really showed how good they were able to run the ball. Didn't turn it over that much. Defensively, still top 10 in multiple categories. Um, Not that high in points per game allowed, though. That was a bit of a sore spot for them. Didn't get as many takeaways as we're accustomed to seeing out of Georgia. And the pressure, the defensive line, I think you could say was not as strong as it's been in previous years for the Bulldogs here. But still, um, for a team to have five stats here, offensively and defensively, in the top 10, there's no debate that Georgia was still a top tier program last season. But obviously, not where they were in either of their national championship years in terms of talent. I think we can all agree on that. Looking at the roster, though, starting with the quarterback here, many lists have been made so far about who the best returning quarterback in the country is. I have not made my list yet, but when I do, I'm not sure where Carson Beck is going to be. Dillon Gabriel definitely gets the nod for me because of his big play ability with his legs. With that being said, though, I do think Beck may be the best pocket passer in the country. Some people like to hate on him, but I don't really know how you can make a list and not put Carson Beck in your top three. He is just too good. And I think he leads all returning players in terms of passing yards last season as well. So, I'm not going to hate on Carson Beck. I think he's more than good enough to win a national championship at Georgia. Honestly, last year's run game was a bit of a letdown, in my opinion. Once they got Dewan Edwards back, it did take them to a new level, but it was more of a running back by committee. They have not had a first or second round running back in the last few years now. There's nothing wrong with that. Even on those championship caliber teams, it was because they had a lot of star running backs and they got it done. But I say all that to say that Trevor Etienne might be the best guy that they've had at the running back position in a long time. In 2 years of Florida, he proved that he can play well in spite of a lack of talent around him. His first season, he had 785 total yards and 6 touchdowns. And then last season, he had 925 total yards and 9 touchdowns. So a big jump in production from year one to year two. And I think if Georgia uses him like they should, people are going to realize that he's one of the better running backs in the country. Besides Trevor, though, it is not a lot of experienced guys at the running back position for Georgia. Um, you know, Roderick Robinson. They lost multiple guys last season. Kendall Milton, the other fucking guy. They lost Dewan Edwards as well. So they lost most of their experienced guys from last season. So it's kind of Trevor Etienne or bust for Georgia in the run game. They did bring in a tight end from Stanford who has had over 1,500 yards combined over the last 3 ends. His name is Benjamin Urasek. So I'm interested to see how they use him. But I think Oscar Delp is kind of the guy who returns and is kind of the guy who is expected to step in as that starting role. Obviously, not even don't even need to say this, but nobody's going to replace Brock Bowers' production or impact here. But I think the tight end position will still hold a lot of importance in Georgia's offense. The wide receiver room, though, is the real group that I think has seen the most growth over the last couple of years. They're like five guys deep in terms of who I all think deserve to play and get some opportunities. I think the departure of Bowers and McConkey, one or two of these guys are going to have to take a massive step up in terms of production. I'll start off with Arian Smith. He's a guy who's been there for a long time. He's entering his fifth season, and I think he's actually going to break the 200-yard barrier for the first time in his career. The reason I mention him is because how long he's been with the program, and I think he's going to have his best year statistically. Dylan Bell, another guy who I think basically doubled his yards from a freshman to a sophomore. He went from 180 to 355. And I'm not going to say he's going to double that number again, but I do expect him to be a big fixture in the offense as a junior. Ra Thomas came in last season from Mississippi State, and he had a bit of a letdown year, to be honest. Um, only had 383 yards, but he was their best deep threat, I'd say, at 16.7 yards per catch. I think Thomas might be the guy who takes the biggest leap in terms of yards and touchdowns for Georgia this season. Colby Young is the new transfer. They brought him in from Miami. He had about 930 yards and 10 touchdowns combined over the last 2 years at Miami. I'm not sure if he can win a starting job in year one for Georgia, but I do think he will make some timely plays and could develop into a good target for Carson Beck. Dominic Lovett, though, he's the guy who led all remaining players in yards and touchdowns last season. He had over 600 yards and 4 touchdowns, 54 catches. It feels like he's the one who has the best connection with Carson Beck, and he does, in my opinion, walk into next season as their number one receiver. So I'm very confident in this group. I think they're going to be able to get it done for Georgia and take them into the late stages of the playoffs. The offensive line has been a strength of their offense over the years. It feels like they just keep losing tackles though to the NFL every year. They don't bring any new offensive linemen from the portal. So that kind of does scare me, but I'm going to put my faith in Kirby Smart and say that he is confident in the group that he brings back. Defensively, when it comes to Georgia's defense, the year by year regression has been visible. You just can't replace as many guys as they've been putting into the NFL on a yearly basis. One thing that interests me is no new starters via the transfer portal. Kirby likes the group that he has, and I think that they can actually be better than they were last season solely off of experience. One of the main causes of concern, though, for some people is the lack of a number one cornerback on the back end. Guys like Keely Ringo, Kamari Lassiter have both left over the last 2 seasons, and it may take a year before Georgia develops a new number one guy to fill those shoes. I feel like Kirby, as long as he's there, is going to keep that front seven top 10 in the country. So I do think they're always going to have a physical advantage on the line of scrimmage, at least in every single game they play. I think it's going to be hard to run the ball against Georgia always, or at least until I'm proven wrong. They've been near the top of that list every single season. Let's get into the schedule though. But obviously, same thing we've always said with Georgia, one of the best rosters in the country, extremely well coached. That's never a real concern for them. The schedule. So last season, Georgia continued their streak of regular season wins to damn near 40, whatever the number is. It's at least 36 because they've gone the last 3 seasons without losing a game in the regular season, which is absolutely fucking incredible. This includes wins over top 10 Missouri, top 10 Ole Miss, ranked Tennessee last season, ranked Kentucky. The Alabama game was a nail biter where Georgia got out coached and they did make the more costly mistakes, especially in crunch time. And obviously, they did unspeakable things to Florida State in that game. They could have got arrested for how badly they did Florida State in the Orange Bowl. But next season, though, they have arguably one of the toughest schedules in the whole country. They play 5 of my top 30 teams, okay, including 3 that are in my top 10. So nobody's going to be able to say that it's an easy schedule next season for Georgia. 3 of these 5 games, by the way, are on the road, and only one is at home because Clemson is at a neutral site game, I believe. So you can pencil in 7 wins here, but they're going to need to win at least 3 out of these top 5 in order to make the playoffs, and 3 out of 4 SEC games in order to make the SEC championship game. So let's get into these tough games here for Georgia. So starting off, to be honest, I'm not putting too much concern into the week 1 matchup against Clemson. I feel like Georgia is on a different level than the Tigers, and I think this is going to be a blowout. I think it'll be a good test for Georgia week 1, but in terms of actually losing the game, I don't see a world where Clemson pulls that off. With that being said, this would make Georgia 3-0 and a top 2 team in the country before they have to head into the real first test in Alabama. Georgia versus Bama may be a top 2 rivalry in the country right now, outside of Ohio State and Michigan, obviously. Alabama has been the only team to give Georgia trouble over the last 3 or 4 years. Now that Nick Saban is gone, hopefully Georgia can erase those demons of the past and solidify themselves as the most dominant team in the conference and the country, really. Make no mistake, Georgia is the much more talented roster on both sides of the ball here. However, since this game is in Alabama, I am worried that the environment might just be too much to handle in just week 4. However, I think that Georgia and their players have all the experience they need in order to take care of business on the road here. And this is a must win game, even though it's week 4. Whoever wins. Sorry. If you're new here, the mic always dies. It's just a guarantee. Where was I at? Whoever wins this game is going to be the favorite, the odds on favorite to go all the way and win the SEC here. So, like I said, must win game. Um, where's that? Okay. Jalen Milroe is going to be the only threat to Georgia here in terms of their chances to win this game. Unless he has a Heisman moment in week 4, the Dogs should be able to take this game pretty comfortably, in my opinion. A win here would make the Bulldogs 6-0 heading into Texas, and all eyes will be on that as a potential SEC championship preview. Um, neither team here necessarily needs to win this game, though, in order to make the college football playoff. However, I think that whoever wins this game is the betting favorite. Damn, my voice just went out there. Whoever wins this game is the betting favorite to win the SEC as a whole. Both teams are being ranked right now in the top 3 to 4 in terms of everybody's rankings, and both teams are heavy betting favorites to win the national championship right now. However, in my opinion, I feel like this game may actually be easier for Georgia than the Alabama game. Georgia has the much more experienced roster on both sides. I feel like they're going to dominate Texas on both lines of scrimmage. I don't believe that Quinn Ewers will have a great game against the Georgia defense, and I also don't expect Texas defensively to be able to slow down the Bulldogs. I actually think that Georgia goes ahead early and wins this game in pretty anticlimactic fashion. Like I don't think the second half will be close at all. That's just my opinion. A win over Texas means that Georgia almost certainly starts the season off 8-0 and is everybody's number one team heading into the biggest test of the season, in my opinion. Regardless of what happens, regardless of what happened last season, I believe that Ole Miss on the road in Week 9 will be Georgia's most difficult game that they play all year. Ole Miss will be battle tested themselves, and they could possibly be 9-0 themselves heading into this matchup. So, and this could even be a top 3 matchup if that's the case between Georgia and Ole Miss. I understand that Georgia took care of business last season. However, Ole Miss has improved drastically. I think their momentum is going to make this a dogfight. This could easily be the best 2 offenses in the entire conference going head to head in this game. And I'm not sure which defense will be able to come up with more stops. Jackson Dort versus Carson Beck will be an amazing head to head matchup in its own right. And I think whichever team gets the ball last could end up taking this home. With all that being said, I do not think Georgia is going to lose a regular season game this year. As crazy as that might sound, with as difficult of a schedule this is, I am not betting against Georgia in the regular season until I see it happen. That's just how I feel about that. So I think the Ole Miss game, win or lose, is going to make Georgia look human, though. And I think it may expose some flaws in their defense. Georgia will have to address those problems quickly because in the very next game, they have to head back to Georgia and host Tennessee. Over 10 weeks into the season now, and Georgia finally gets to host a ranked team. Tennessee has been very good the last 2 seasons, and I expect them to be a very explosive offense next year. With that being said, I don't think that Nico and company are good enough to beat the Bulldogs at home. This could be a very fun and exciting game in the first half, but Tennessee does not have what it takes to go the distance with Georgia right now. I think the Bulldogs score at will down the stretch and put this game away with a double-digit victory to secure their 4th straight undefeated regular season. It may sound a little delusional of me to predict Georgia to go undefeated against this daunting schedule here, but I'm going to put my faith and trust into the team that has proven that they are the most dominant program over the last 3 years. Even though their schedule may look difficult on paper, I really don't think that any of these teams, with the exception of Ole Miss, pose any significant threat to Georgia on the field. Out of this top 4 that I've created in the SEC right here, Georgia is my pick to win the entire SEC. I'm not sure who their opponent could be. It could be Texas, could be Ole Miss, could be Missouri, but I think they will have already beaten all 3 of those teams over the last 2 years. And I think that Georgia has no problem making the college football playoff and winning as many games as they need to reach the national championship game. But eventually, I think Georgia is going to lose to my number 1 team in the country. and that's Ohio State. That is Ohio State. All right, let's close it out, man. Last team in the entire rankings here. Like I said in the Georgia intro, this was a very tough decision for me on who to place number one, but I think the deciding factor was how many NFL first or second round picks Ohio State convinced to come back for another year. And on top of that, they have the best roster in the country, and then they made two of the biggest portal acquisitions in the country this offseason. They did upgrade their quarterback position as well, and I feel like they checked every box they needed to convince me that they are the odds-on favorite to win the national championship. Let's take a look at what they were last season. It was not that impressive. Offensively, at least, it was not what we were used to seeing out of Ohio State. They struggled to run the ball. Even with guys like TreVeyon Henderson, they struggled to run the ball. Did not throw the ball nearly as well as they had the last two seasons. Last 5 seasons, even if you want to call it like that. Didn't really excel anywhere on offense besides turnovers, I guess, if you want to put it that way. It was a middle of the pack offense, maybe top 40 in the country if you want to give them that nod, but not at all what we've come to see from Ohio State offensively. Defensively, though, stark contrast. I would argue a top 5 to 6 defense in the entire country. Top 3 in total yards, passing yards per game, they were the best in the country, and then points per game allowed, second to only Michigan at 11.2. It was a dominant defense that did everything except get takeaways, which is just shocking to me. I don't know how you could be so good, but not take away the ball. Needless to say, Ohio State has made a complete 180 from what they were like 2 or 3 years ago defensively as to one of the best in the country now. Let's take a look at their offense, though, and all of the changes that they made this offseason. When I look at Will Howard, it's not necessarily about how good I think he is, because I don't think he's a top 10 or 15 quarterback in the country. It's about how much better he is than what they had last season. He had nearly 3,000 total yards and 33 touchdowns last season at Kansas State in just 12 games. Those numbers aren't jaw-dropping, but again, Ohio State does not need this guy to be Justin Fields or C.J. Stroud to be a big upgrade over Kyle McCord. The running back room is what's drawing the most attention for Ohio State right now, and I think that's justified. Off the top of my head, I don't know if there's another duo in the country that's as talented, but any other duo in the country is going to be compared to these two guys right here. TreVeyon Henderson should have been in the NFL right now as a top 60 or 70 pick. As a true freshman, the man had over 1,500 total yards and 19 touchdowns. He's dealt with a few injuries, though, over the last 2 seasons. That did not stop him, though, from totaling 1,155 yards and 11 touchdowns last year. He's still a versatile back who contributes in both the run and pass game, and he has the explosiveness to take any play to the house. Quinshad Junkins was one of the most impressive freshman running backs I've ever seen. As a true freshman in the SEC, the man had over 1,700 total yards in 17 touchdowns. He was so impressive in year one that last season, his 1,300 total yards and 17 touchdowns felt like a disappointment. Judkins has been a dominant player at Ole Miss the last 2 seasons, but now it looks like he's going to Ohio State for the money. Nothing against that, but it did kind of impact my opinion of him as a person, I guess. But in terms of what these two guys can do on the field, it's probably the best running back duo that I've ever seen. When it comes to the wide receiver corps, honestly, I'm not as impressed as some people are, because 2 out of these 3 guys are extremely young and have yet to make a name for themselves. Now, with that being said, it's Ohio State, and I have no doubt that both these guys are 5-star players who are going to end up being in the NFL, but we don't know that yet for sure. So I'm a little more skeptical on their pass game as a whole than most people are. I'm actually going to start off with their number 1 guy, because there's actually a lot riding on him to be a dominant number 1 and ease the young guys into the system, as well as their new quarterback. That's Emeka Egbuka. If he goes down next season, or if he doesn't perform like he's supposed to, then the entire Ohio State pass game as a whole could be in real jeopardy. His breakout season came in 2022. We had 85 touches for 1,238 yards and 12 touchdowns. Last season was a big letdown with just 500 yards in 10 games. Obviously, I expect a big bounce back year for him, but I'm not sure if we can expect the numbers he had when C.J. Stroud was his quarterback now that he has Will Howard. Cardinal Tate has been waiting in the wings for his opportunity. As a freshman last season, he had over 250 yards and 1 touchdown. Obviously, he's going to see a big increase in both snaps and targets, and I'm fairly confident that he's going to step into his starting role nicely. I don't have any stat line predictions or anything, but I do think he's going to be a productive number 2 for Ohio State. Jeremiah Smith is apparently a number 1 player in his entire recruiting class. He's going to be a starting day 1 receiver for Ohio State as a true freshman. Who knows how good he's going to look? I mean, the man could come in and be a complete stud, or he might have a rough time adjusting. Similar to Carnell Tate, I got a pretty big question mark over Jeremiah Smith right now. They've lost several offensive linemen to the NFL over the last 2 years, so I'm a bit worried about that unit as a whole right now. Um, but I'm gonna give them the benefit of the doubt until I see some concerns here. Defensively, the Buckeyes have real superstars on this defense. JT Tuimoloau, Jack Sawyer, Denzel Burke, and then their top transfer guy, Caleb Downs. Caleb Downs was an absolute monster last season at Alabama as a true freshman, by the way. He had over 100 total tackles, 3 takeaways, and snagging him out of the portal was absolutely massive for Ohio State. They were already debatably, like I said, a top 5 or 6 defense in the country, but I could see a world where they get even better, which is just scary to think about. They didn't really get that many takeaways last season. So compared to other top defenses, it was a little bit of a letdown, but I also think that their pass rush could be improved here. So it's scary to think about how good they could potentially be. I expect this unit to be top 10 in the country without a shadow of a doubt. And that would just give their offense so many more leeway and opportunities next season. If we take a look at the schedule here, Ohio State only played 5 teams last season who were ranked, and they only went 3-2 against those ranked teams. Their most dominant win came against Wisconsin in terms of ranked teams here, and they only won that game 24-10. So what I'm getting at is that their offense was so disappointing that they couldn't pull away and blow out anybody really. And even teams like Maryland and Rutgers and Indiana were all too close, as well. So obviously they lost their last 2 games to Michigan and Missouri. And I think both those teams were just better than Ohio State because, Ohio State finished at number 10. Next season, the Buckeyes play just 3 of my top 30 ranked teams. So back-to-back years with relatively easy schedules. And Nebraska and Iowa, they're most likely would be in like my top 40, for example. But I don't expect, and neither of those teams should be able to pose any real trouble for Ohio State. Let's take a look at their toughest games here. So for their 6th game of the season, they travel to Eugene to play against another one of my top 3 teams in Oregon. Both teams will have already had a bye, and I expect both to be 5-0 going into this game. I think this should be a top 4 matchup. And like I said earlier, a preview of the eventual Big Ten championship game. Like I said during my Oregon segment, I expect the environment to play a big role in Oregon's favor here. I think Oregon has the better coach, the better quarterback, home field advantage here. So I think it's going to be very hard for Ohio State to be able to walk in there and knock them off. I think Oregon's going to have an amazing team. I don't think there's any shame in losing to them in the regular season. But after this loss, I think most people are going to be writing Ohio State off, crowning Oregon as the Big Ten champions and the favorites to go all the way. But I do think Ohio State is going to rally after this loss and go on a very, very dominant run. Ohio State gets their second bye week after the Oregon game, in order to lick their wounds, regroup. And I think they're going to come back and absolutely demolish Nebraska the following week. So that would make them 6-1, traveling to Penn State for their 8th game of the season. This game was incredibly close last season. It really shouldn't have been. Both defenses were suffocating. Neither offense could move the ball. I don't expect this game to be as close as it was last season because I think Ohio State is going to beat the shit out of the Nittany Lions on their home field, embarrass them. The difference in talent between these teams is glaring. I don't think Penn State can compete with Ohio State right now. I think it's going to be a big win for Ohio State's confidence since Penn State will probably be ranked in the top 10. And I think this would make Ohio State 7-1 as they proceed to slaughter Purdue, Indiana, and Northwestern. That would make them 10-1 as they meet a potential 10-1 or 9-2 Michigan in the biggest rivalry in college football with everything on the line. This game may very well be the biggest game of the season for a lot of reasons. I believe both of these teams will have a conference loss to Oregon. So whether or not Michigan beats Texas is kind of irrelevant. The winner of this game will get their chance to rematch Oregon in the Big Ten championship, and the loser will most likely have multiple losses and have an outside chance at making the college football playoff. The Michigan 3-game win streak in this rivalry is the big storyline. So can they either extend it to 4? And when all the odds are stacked against them here because they've lost a lot of talent, a lot of coaches, and this game is in Ohio State. So to summarize it, no, this game will not be as close as the last 3 seasons have been. Well, Not all of those games were close, but I do expect the Buckeyes to win by double digits here. I think they're going to kill Michigan's chances of making the playoffs again. And I think Ohio State's firmly going to take control of this rivalry once again. I am all but certain the Big Ten championship game will be between Oregon and Ohio State. And my philosophy is pretty simple. I do not expect either of these teams to beat each other twice. So I think whoever wins the regular season matchup is going to lose the national championship, and vice versa. Whoever loses the regular season matchup is going to end up winning the Big Ten championship. So since I predicted Oregon to win the regular season matchup, I think Ohio State is going to end up winning the Big Ten championship and going into the playoffs as a top 2 team. I then expect them to win however many games it takes to make the national championship and meet Georgia there, in which I think the Buckeyes will win. I think it's going to be their first national title in a decade, the first under Ryan Day, and conclude this series. Man, don't know how long this was. I hope it wasn't as long as the last one. But man, that's it, man. That's it for this series. It took a lot of work, a lot of effort. Leave a like if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're somehow new. And NFL videos. NFL videos from now on for a while. Okay, so get used to it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.